Thank you all for joining us at today's session. First, I would like to introduce Pakistani American Press Association, PAPA, for our global audience. Pakistani American Press Association, PAPA, represents American journalists of Pakistani origin as well as correspondent of various Pakistani media outlets in the United States. We have a wide range of diversified members in Washington, New York, San Francisco, Pennsylvania, Texas, Chicago, and other US cities and states. We are recognized by the Mainstream Journalists Association in the United States as well as by the various think tanks and media advocacy groups. PAPA is the only Pakistani American journalistic entity that is registered as nonprofit 501c. One of the PAPA's primary mission is educating journalists on the current complex issues, such as now we have the COVID-19. PAPA facilitates a platform for journalists to discuss significant issues ranging from public health and economics and politics and foreign policy, of course. From the expert speakers like we have today, PAPA produced digital curriculum that is posted to its website, allowing journalists across the world to access the best practices and enhance their reporting. You can find more information about PAPA at pakuspress.org. Now, moving forward, I'm going to introduce our panelists who will be participating in today's discussion. Michael Kugelman is currently working as the Deputy Director of Asia Program and Senior Associate for South Asia at Wilson Center. He is leading specialist on Afghanistan, India, and Pakistan and their relationship with the United States. He is editor or co-editor of 11 books. Murtaza Solangi is a veteran Pakistani journalist now based in Islamabad. He has headed the National Radio of Pakistan. He has worked for national and international media and he is currently working as the executive editor of online portal NayaDaur Media. Raza Rumi is a policy analyst, journalist, and an author. Currently, he's working as the director, Park Center for Independent Media. He's also working with Ethica College and visiting faculty at Cornell Institute of Public Affairs. Raza has been editor of the Friday Times and the Daily Times. He's also the founding editor of NayaDaur, a digital media initiative. Now, without any further delay, I'm going to hand over the floor to Information Secretary Saqib al-Islam, who is elected member of PAPA. To you, Saqib.
Thank you, Khurram, the president of Pakistani American Press Association, and on all the panelists for today. Thank you so much. We are covering the capital of Pakistan, Islamabad, to capital of Washington, U.S., Washington, D.C. And then, of course, we have Michael Kugelman from Annapolis, Maryland, the state capital of Maryland. And then we have Raza Rumi from New York, which is the epicenter of this pandemic in the United States. And today, as this COVID-19 has claimed more than 105,000 lives around the world and more than 1.7 million cases around the world. And in New York, it's a really bad situation. So at this time, when everybody is feeling, is getting hurt by this, the New York specifically, of course, where right now we have more than 170,000 cases of COVID-19 and almost 8,000 deaths. So we'll get a lot of information from Raza from the ground in New York, what he's seeing, and of course from Murtaza Solangi Saab, like what he's seeing in Islamabad, and then of course we'll get some overall overview from Michael as he is observing the news around the world. So our topic today is how this pandemic, which has never before seen pandemic and unprecedented damage it has done to human society, is going to transform journalism and how it's going to impact. So first of all, I'll start with Michael, that, overall, how do you see, before we go into other topics, that how this COVID-19 is going to transform journalism and how it's going to impact?
Well, thank you, Saqib, and thank you for having me. Thank you to PAPA for this opportunity. It's an honor to be speaking on a panel of experts like these. I think that for my generation, for quite a few years, the 9/11 attacks were really a seminal event. I mean, the thing that for an American like me really transformed the way that I think about the world, and it transformed America and the world in so many ways. But I would argue that this pandemic will exceed that in terms of global implications, just because, this is a crisis that's not only going to have far-reaching and long-lasting implications for global politics and international economics, but also just for the way that we all interact. I think societal interactions will be affected in a big way for many years to come. So, you know, in terms of your question about how this will affect journalism, I think it may be too early to tell. Certainly, though, I think that if you want to look at a country like Pakistan, certainly one has to be, in my view, cognizant of the fact that this pandemic really seems to amplify the challenges for the Pakistani media and also challenges within the Pakistani media sector. And I'll be very brief. And I should say that not to state the obvious, that I am neither a Pakistani nor a journalist, though I'm oftentimes mistaken for both, particularly on social media. So I cannot claim to speak for Pakistani journalists. I look forward to hearing what our journalist colleagues have to say. You know, but in terms of my observations, 2 points. One is that in Pakistan, this pandemic has underscored the challenges that journalists already face in an environment that is oftentimes not friendly to journalists, that produce reportage that is not friendly to the state. And you know, I remember something that the late great Asma Jahangir had said at a presentation she gave at the Wilson Center a number of years ago. She said that in Pakistan, so long as you don't do any work that goes against the views of the state and certain red lines, the sky's the limit for what you can do. There's all kinds of opportunities, but if you cross the red lines, you'll never get to do an honest day's work. She was talking generally, but certainly I think this applies to journalism too. And I think one thing we've seen so far, one thing I've observed, is that you know, unfortunately, the government and the state more broadly in Pakistan, it has favorites when it comes to outlets. There are certain outlets that tend to be critical of the state, and those are the ones that have tended to suffer the most. And you know, what I've observed is a number of cases where Imran Khan, the prime minister, has had some press engagements with media, and there are certain outlets that have not been invited to these briefings about the coronavirus. And I think that is just really serious. You need to have any journalist, regardless of the views they have about the state, present to these briefings and in a position to ask a question to the prime minister. Second point is that I think that this crisis has accentuated the challenges within the media sector in Pakistan, particularly quality and quality control issues. I've got tremendous respect for journalists in Pakistan across the board. But I think at times like this, you see something happening that you oftentimes have seen in the past, but it's sort of accentuated now. And that is, you know, everyone wants to get the big scoop. Everyone wants to be the first to break the big story, particularly in such a huge crisis like this one. And unfortunately, this tends to lead to sensationalistic and sloppy reporting sometimes. And I don't want to overstate this problem, but as I recall, a few days ago, there was one outlet that announced incorrectly that British Prime Minister Boris Johnson had died. In fact, he had not. Apparently, the outlet was citing a fake account claiming to be the BBC. But that's sort of an example of how these things could be accentuated. But you know, to end, I would just say that these issues that we're discussing here about the press and press crackdowns, certainly not exclusive to Pakistan. You know, I think that if we're going to be talking about what impact COVID-19 will have for the press in Pakistan, certainly you could also have that discussion about India, where I think the crackdowns on the press have been much more overt and much more frequent. You have the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, inviting top officials from media outlets across the board, and essentially encouraging them, to put it, I guess, mildly, to produce only positive stories about the government and what it's doing in its COVID-19 response. That is not a good thing. And of course, here in the United States, President Trump, to his credit, holds press briefings almost every day to give briefings about the virus, but he uses these briefings, unfortunately, to lash out against the journalists and the outlets that he doesn't like, which I think is so distasteful, to put it mildly. So this is certainly a conversation we can have about Pakistan, but we could have it about a number of other countries too.
Yep. So, Murtaza Solangi, Mr. Murtaza Solangi, how do you think that this whole Michael gave the overview of the world, but when you talk about press freedom, which Michael started the topic, so I think Reporters Without Borders has said that Afghanistan, Mexico, and India, and then of course it's included the US, which has the most killing when it comes to journalists. So the press freedom is really in jeopardy on those countries. And who would have thought that US would be there, but it is. Again, so in Pakistan, of course, it's an interesting case, and Michael did put some light on that. I would like to hear from you. So how this COVID-19 pandemic is going to impact the freedom of press in Pakistan. Let's put it that way.
Well, much before this COVID-19, Pakistani media was experiencing a lot of difficulties. Those difficulties started way before 2018 elections. And those difficulties were reflected even in the European Union report on elections, how the media was managed, how the media was coerced. And after the installation of Imran Khan government, we have seen a lot of coercive measures against individual journalists and media houses. Recently, I'm sure you are aware of the CEO of Jung and Geo Group, Mir Shakilur Rahman, arrested by the accountability outfit. And there were a lot of campaigns against other prominent journalists as well. As we speak, probably a couple of thousand Pakistani journalists have lost their jobs even before we approached this pandemic. But now, as we go through this COVID-19 pandemic, it's still an early stage for us, because Pakistani officially casualties have not crossed 100 mark yet. It's around 71, 72, and the suspected cases officially certified are closer to 5,000. But we are still in the early stage, because we entered this pandemic late, although we border with China, the very epicenter of this pandemic. But since we did not allow any traffic of people between China and Pakistan during that period, so that's why we were not affected by China. We were affected by Iran and European countries and some Gulf countries. Now, coming back to this, covering this COVID-19, we have probably 4 or 5 journalists who have been affected directly, who were victims of this virus. And there were a couple of cases in the media houses. So as we approach this pandemic, you see many anchors of different programs have started hosting their shows from their homes, some on Skype and some on satellite link. We see that many evening chat shows with politicians, we see more and more politicians and newsmakers showing up on those TV channels from their homes, and most of them using Skype and other methods. So when it comes to access, now we have a centralized operational center by the name of National Coordination and Operation Center, which is mainly run by armed forces and has a civilian liaison with a federal minister. So this is an early stage, but as the world has experienced a lot of problems of fake news and WhatsApp academy of medical experts, Pakistan has its own share. We also have been getting those, unscientific advices that have been shared even by mainstream media. But slowly and gradually, people are now switching towards verified sources of information, both nationally and internationally. Even the government has come up with
it's a big issue, Mr. Solangi. And I would like to go to Raza Rumi at this point in New York. Of course, we are going through a time when journalism is most important, and informing the public and keeping your governments accountable is never been more critical than this in probably our lifetimes. So at this time, how do you see this whole pandemic is transforming news gathering? As Murtaza pointed out, that most of the big channels and news anchors and the informators are have been cooped up into their garages or into their libraries, and it's very difficult to go out and gather the news. What are you seeing on the ground in New York, and how do you think it's impacting the journalism?
So I think it is a big challenge, and some of it has already been highlighted. I think the first important part is for journalists to be safe. We have cases of many journalists across the globe, getting the infection. And even in Pakistan, the first cases were reported from a Lahore-based channel. And many media outlets are struggling to provide them protective gear, masks, which are globally in short supply. Even here in Ithaca, where I'm based, I'm on the board of a local news outlet called the Ithaca Voice, and that has been our primary consideration from day one as to how to keep the team safe and what sort of measures to take. So, because research also shows us, history of pandemics tells us that at the time of such extraordinary disease and fear and panic, it is important to have reliable information. And even if you take the case of famines in the past, or the plague, or the Spanish flu, etc., reliable information was always important for the public and for the policymakers and for those in power who have to do something about it. So I think that's the first primary consideration which needs to be followed. There are more resources here in the US with most outlets, so therefore they can take such measures. But in Pakistan, there are reports and there are many demands where media workers have been asked to both work from home, but also they've been demanding better equipment and facilities. So I think that's one side. But the other side of this pandemic is also how the populist authoritarian governments are trying to muzzle voices that are critical of reporting, of government response. So Michael just mentioned our favorite President Trump's daily takedown of the media and media workers, fake news, etc. But at least Trump just makes these statements. He connects with his support base. But in India, one of the most respected digital outlets, The Wire, its editors are facing a police case lodged by the largest state in India, the UP, where they reported that a huge gathering was led by the chief minister of UP. And The Wire just reported that, in times of social distancing, how was the government doing that itself? Because it's a Hindu nationalist government there. And they are now booked under these cases. And there have been many other reports. I mean, there was a New York Times report about 3 days ago, which said that, that media freedoms in the US, in India, are under severe stress and attack. And Solangi Saab just mentioned that Pakistan's largest private media network, Jio and Jung Group, its owner, is in jail. And it's in jail on some 34-year-old case, which, and the entire proceeding reeks of vendetta against the media outlet, because the government does not like that media outlet carrying out a daily critique of the government policies. So, but now, I mean, one can agree or disagree with what journalists write or say on TV or on the newspaper, but to arrest them and put them in jail, and especially when there's a global movement to take out prisoners out of these jails, because the prisons are likely to become hubs of COVID-19 infection everywhere. I mean, even in the US, there's a strong civic, groups are pressurizing the government to do something about the prisons, and many states have actually taken action to release the older, inmates, etc. So in Pakistan, you have this ironical situation where an old man is in the jail, and who happens to own and be the editor-in-chief of that largest media outlet. So you can tell that the state of media and media freedoms are under immense pressure. If you look at the case of Hungary, the prime minister there has already, imposed almost a martial law, taking all the powers of the parliament, and has actually enacted a regulation that no journalist can report on the coronavirus updates without some kind of a permission. Now, how can journalists seek permission from bureaucrats to report on their and to fulfill their basic duty of informing the public?
Yes.
The most critical.
That takes us to our second point, as Mr. Solangi had mentioned as well. So when there's a tussle between the government and the news organization or the media group, like we have seen in the US, Mr. Trump and CNN had shown some tussle because, of course, they asked him critical questions or hard-hitting questions, and then what the media group does, of course, what information they give out. So now we go to the second point, which is the spread of disinformation during this whole pandemic, when there is not many on-ground resources like where you could go, or one of your stringer or as a journalist in that country or that area where the news is originating from could confirm that. So at this point, how do you stop or combat the spread of disinformation? I would like to start this with Mr. Solangi. Like, what do you think, like at this point in time, how journalists and journalistic organizations and media groups can combat the spread of disinformation?
Because this pandemic is of epic and biblical proportions, it is almost impossible for any government to handle it with precision, because no state in the recent history, has experienced a challenge like this. So states have the tendency to cover up, to suppress information that exposes their mishandling or their lack of performance. So it's very natural. It has happened everywhere. So that's one challenge, that any information that's critical and important for your viewers and readers to know, how to pull it out and present it in a very responsible manner, that you do not end up creating more anarchy and paranoia. Because an information like the number of casualties, the number and speed and velocity of spread of the virus, and things like that, they can create a situation that may be impossible for the law enforcement and the health experts to handle. So this creates tremendous challenges, not only for the states, but for professional, responsible journalists. Okay. So normally, we have this three-source rule, that whenever you get an information, you verify it with at least three sources. I would say in present circumstances, if you get a very sensitive information that can create a public disorder, you want to check it, with more than three sources. And thanks to the technology, thanks to internet, thanks to modern communications, it is possible to verify the information that you have to push out through your mediums. It is possible. So you want to suppress your rush to push out the information to make sure that the information that you are pushing out is credible and it's the right information. So
Great.
that is more like a tightrope dancing in these circumstances, that you have.
Michael, at this point, Mr. Solangi, if you let me please.
Please.
Michael, you work in Washington D.C., which is the capital of United States, where most important information comes out to the world. And since this pandemic started hitting really bad in the United States, the president has been coming out daily to White House press briefing, which was a dream in the before that we would see president in the press briefing room. But now he's coming daily and giving first-hand information along with his coronavirus task force, which is headed by the Vice President Pence. So he's giving out the information, what he has, how many ventilators this country have, how many masks we are producing, what is happening, how many deaths are there, how many cases. So this is coming from the president of the country. So do you think this is a good model for the rest of the world to follow, that instead of going around and fishing for information from different sources, we hear from the head of the state and we have information? But again, how valid it is, that's another debate. But do you think it's a good idea to follow this model, Michael?
Well, yes, absolutely. One can certainly fault President Trump for his response to COVID-19 on many levels. However, absolutely, I think that he and his government have the right idea to be out there front and center, public facing with journalists essentially every day, sometimes more than once a day, to provide latest figures, latest updates. And certainly, many people have questioned the things that Trump himself has said while he's standing there on the podium, such as his recent suggestion that antibiotics can combat coronavirus, even though we all know that antibiotics cannot be used on viruses, only bacteria. And I think that more importantly, when he's up there giving these briefings, he has experts next to him. And I think that's, most of us Americans, we really start paying attention at those briefings when Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx, who are two of the top epidemiologists, medical officials in the United States, when they're speaking, we're listening. And I think that is important. And this is where I think that you could fault someone like a Narendra Modi, who never really, he never gives press conferences at all. He's never out there. He addresses the nation, but that's one-sided. He says what he wants to say, and people can't speak back and ask him to elaborate or whatever. So I think that's significant right there. But just very briefly, the fake news issue is so critical, and I don't think that it can be combated just because there's too much of it. And also, what's worse is that much of it is propagated on social media, which is a lot harder to regulate than traditional media. Though, of course, it's now you're starting to see efforts on the part of governments, including the Pakistani government, to try to censor and intimidate those that use social media to provide accurate, truthful views. I think that you need to look at civil society. You need to look at bottom-up approaches to combat fake news. I look at an organization called Alt News in India, ALT News. This is it's run by a group of folks that are very active on the internet, on social media. What they do is they take stories that are fake and they prove why they're fake. Particularly recently, these suggestions reported from far-right Indian media outlets that suggesting that Muslims in India were spreading COVID-19. Alt News was out there proving exactly why they're wrong. And the good thing is that it gets a lot of attention. I think you need to look at citizen advocacy here. And I don't know if Pakistan has an equivalent to Alt News, but this is what I think you need to look at. In the US as well, you need to look at citizen efforts to try to push back against this fake news. You can't depend on the government, especially when in the US, the president himself propagates fake news.
Great. And we have a couple of more important topics and timing is running out. I'm going to go to Raza Rumi in New York. And of course, disinformation, to combat disinformation, journalists have to go out in the field and report from there. And that presents another risk, the safety risk of journalists, because as I told in the beginning, that everybody in New York knows somebody who is infected by COVID-19. So at this time, what should journalists do? What should the organizations do? And you are in the epicenter of this pandemic in the United States, and you have seen some stuff in the ground. And so at this point, what are the best practices? What are the best practices for journalists on the ground who want to report, who want to give the information, but of course, keeping themselves safe?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm in upstate, so here there are many cases as well. In fact, some of my colleagues were also tested positive. In fact, I was in a conference where one of the professors, unfortunately, uh, uh, thankfully she's recovered. But it's like everywhere, and obviously the first priority is safety. But I think the thankfully technology gives us so many options to actually seek and gather and verify information without physical danger. So that is one particular good aspect of using so many technological tools. In fact, the most vulnerable are the frontline workers, the medical workers, the truck drivers, the police, the people who stack all the shelves in grocery stores, the pharmacy workers. I mean, I feel for them. So I think the key issue here is that, because of social media's proliferation across the world, and the excessive misinformation and disinformation being shared, especially on the cures. So like you have all these WhatsApp forwards where if you take steam two times a day, or eat some kind of a herb, or take hot water with lemon, and coronavirus will go. Even leaders of
Don't forget Kalonji.
Kalonji, Kalonji,
Yeah,
yes. And even leaders of many countries have been misinformed, that summer will kill the virus, or that it goes into human body, and human body is the temperature is very warm, it dies. So there are all sorts of nuts, mad theories being propagated. So the key task of journalists these days needs to be check those fake news, and curb disinformation. So what Mike just mentioned, alt news, and not the alt news here, Michael, so let me correct, because there's a very crazy alt news site here,
Yes,
but
very important caveat. Thank you.
yes.
yeah.
So because I was searching something the other day, and I went to alt news, and it took me to the US alt news, where there were all sorts of conspiracy theories about how coronavirus is a big conspiracy by those who want to harm America. So alt news in India, but other outlets also. So I think that is what is very important. Those journalists, and some of them are already doing fact check and fake news alert, and telling people that this is wrong information, don't do such things. So I think that is the key task for the moment. I mean, and then of course the most important part here is the response of the governments. We have seen what happened in UK. The UK Prime Minister, may he recover very soon, but his slow response, his denialism, cost the people heavy. I mean, he was, and his advisors were following some crazy herd immunity idea, which was not tested properly, vetted by scientists. In Pakistan also, thankfully, the Prime Minister is now more serious about the virus. But initially, he was also dismissive, saying it's just like flu, and may only 2 to 3% get affected. And even in the US, where President Trump, we know, took time, and one of the biggest critiques that you read here in media or watch on TV is that the response was very slow and very mishandled, and the evident lack of coordination is still that thing. So I think journalists at this time have to keep on reminding the governments, keep on reminding the local governments to ensure that, number one, frontline workers are safe, supply chains are not disrupted, health systems remain in order, and public is given more and more information on staying at home, social distancing, on taking all measures possible which will not overwhelm the health system, and not overwhelm the hospitals, because everywhere there are shortages of ventilators. I mean, it's not anymore about developed or developing countries. I mean, of course, there are still inequalities, but all countries are facing these huge shortage of medical supplies and medical workers.
And journalists have to do this while also practicing social distancing and keeping the
Yes.
measures intact. So, of course, uh, keep yourself safe. As I said, like, wear masks and gloves and spray yourself when you come back in from outside or stuff like that, which is like basic safety measures. But I have seen increasingly in last couple of weeks, especially like journalists trying to get the breaking news or trying to get the news first, just not practicing social distancing. Even a picture coming from Pakistan today, where they were covering, a big religious gathering. Religious gathering was practicing the social distancing, but journalists was all like, caught up on each other. So this needs to be stopped. Like, so how would you go about this, Mr. Solangi? Like, any advice for the journalists? Of course, they are, giving news on one of the biggest pandemic in the history of the mankind, but they have to be vigilant while reporting.
We keep telling reporters and camera crews, they are there in the field. And we keep telling them that you don't have to use those collar mics. Try to use, the microphone with a long, stick. So you could remotely do the recording. And always use, alcohol swipes for cleaning your microphones and headphones and things that you use. So we already keep telling people, but it will take time. It's very important for the field crew to maintain that distance, especially in covered spaces. It's very much important that you wear your masks and use hand sanitizer. So this is already in vogue. We keep telling people, but it will take some time.
Yep. All right. So, and then one of the most important aspect of this whole impact of COVID-19 on the journalism is, the financial, physical, and mental stress on everybody who is, out there reporting, or who is in their homes and reporting, and trying to get the information to the public. So during this pandemic, I don't know how long it's going to last. We don't know how long it's going to last and how long we have to practice this. Michael, I would like to start with you on this. Like, under this intense financial, physical, and mental stress, how the journalists have to combat whatever is coming to them every single day.
Yeah, well, here ultimately, I would defer to my journalist colleagues, though. I think the important thing to highlight here is that financial struggle is not new in the journalism industry in Pakistan. Obviously, if you're lucky enough to be a very senior journalist or very much at the top, you don't have to worry. But for those, the reporters, the producers, editors, those that have never been in a position to have a high salary, and particularly one that they could depend on, indeed, COVID-19 is going to accentuate that, because I think that really is a big story here, that economies in countries, including developing world countries, everyone is going to experience economic consequences from this. And of course, Pakistan had already been suffering through an economic crisis over the last few years that the government has struggled to really overcome, much less fix. So, here you have to look for support programs, relief programs, and to his credit, I know that the Prime Minister has rolled out what's been described as the biggest economic relief program in Pakistan's history, with the ASAS program. So you have to hope that the government can continue to provide on those levels, because I don't know, and I would defer to others on the panel, if media outlets themselves have the capacity to provide economic relief to their employees. And obviously, much like anywhere else, the bigger, more prominent, wealthier outlets are going to have more capacity to provide economic support to their staff than are the smaller ones, the online ones, those that don't have as many resources. But indeed, I recognize and understand that for journalists in Pakistan who have already struggled with the challenge of economic support, that's going to be even more significant. And the hope will be that the government is in a position to provide some type of relief to families across the board that can include those journalists as well.
So Raza, how would you, take this further and put some light on how to combat or, tackle this immense, I would say, financial pressure, which eventually gives you a psychological pressure?
So, this is going to, of course, the economic downturn and the estimated, reduction of global economic output by 1/3. Now it is being anticipated and worked out by experts in the coming 18 to 24 months is going to be a tough time for the media industry as well. Already we are seeing signs of that. Even in the US, advanced countries like the US, the smaller outlets, the smaller news publications, local media are feeling the pressure. And, journalists are likely to lose jobs and find other sources of livelihood. In Pakistan, as we speak, just a few hours ago, a TV channel has been closed, which had been purchased by a tycoon, land and property tycoon. He just gave this notice saying, okay, it's all shut down. Dozens of workers have been laid off, and no prior notice, no real thinking about their welfare. So I think everybody's going through a mental stress and mental health issue at the moment, whether it's a journalist or non-journalist, a leader or an ordinary citizen, and journalists more so because of their work and the pressure and the risks and the hazards that they face, both in terms of the physical and health hazards, but also the kind of political and governmental pressures that they face in many countries. So this is a very tough time. I think that is why we need groups which are active, committee to protect journalists, Reporters Without Borders, and local national level networks that look at these issues that concern journalists' safety, freedom, health, and security. They become even more important, and they need to be invested in, and they need to be supported at this very important time and difficult time. I think the most, I'll end by saying that the media houses across the world in different countries, they need to ensure that they should not be firing journalists in the middle of a pandemic. Most, the bigger and the wealthier media outlets have enough money, we know that, and assets that they can support journalists for at least a few months down the road. But these sudden layoffs are only going to make it worse.
Okay, I will go to Mr. Solangi at this time, and of course, keeping this topic on, do you think to combat with all these issues that journalists are going to face in the coming future or facing right now, is there a need of time to change the business model of the journalism industry, of how the media houses work, how the channels work, and give more safety, not only financial, but also psychological safety to the journalists who are out there on the field, not only on the ones who are on the TV screens?
Yes, I think Pakistani media was already going through a crisis before this pandemic, but now, all the information that's coming in about Pakistani economy is that probably our GDP would go below 1%. So from 6% GDP in 2018 to 1 and even minus 1% GDP. That means you would have less advertising revenue. That means there would be less money for the media houses. So journalists will lose jobs. I don't want to dampen the spirit of journalists who have mission to report and disseminate information. But journalists would have to plan serious economic management at the individual level and at the community level, both. And they would have to diversify their income resources so they are able to cover the next big challenge, because the next big story would be how millions upon millions of people are going through this economic upheaval, which would be faced by entire countries. So they would have to do some serious diversification and economic management, both at the individual level and at the community level. They can't just be thinking of some kind-hearted media mughals who would look after them. That's not going to happen. So they would have to plan their family budgets. They would have to think about, even in media, what would be the next big issues to cover, like health. People would not be spending money on tourism and leisure. So, these are the issues that journalists would have to think about.
Yes, and then with this pandemic, what we're foreseeing right now, another Great Depression, probably not only in the U.S. economy but the world economy, and it is going to get hit badly. And we have to prepare ourselves, and we have to prepare all the industries. Fortunately, show must go on, news must be dispersed and gathered. So media industry would survive this, but of course, with all the setbacks it would have, it would probably be weaker than it is now. It was like a year before, it was 5 years ago. So we are all going to see the impact in not only our personal lives, but our professional lives and our social life, which is the worst hit by this pandemic. It's going to change the way we live our lives socially as well. So I would like to wrap up this discussion. Thank you so much, all of you, for putting out this great information and advice for the journalists and the journalism and the media houses and for the governments out there. And right now is, of course, this media industry and journalism has a great responsibility to not only give the information to the public who are hunkered down in their homes and they cannot go out, but also all they depend upon is the news from what's coming from outside, where all these like brave journalists, people, camera crew, the staff who are out there in the field and gathering and giving them the information. So we have to keep that in mind. So at the end, I would like everybody to please give brief remarks when we wrap up this, and then I'll go to Khurram for the ending. Michael.
Well, thank you. And, I echo your words, Saqib, that, you have journalists everywhere, certainly in Pakistan and elsewhere, that are still out there, risking their lives literally, and also trying to do what they can to get stories and to get stories accurately and to get things right. So full credit to that. We so often hear these applause and praise for the medical workers, and they deserve huge praise, but same with the journalists as well. So, and that's all I'll say. I think it's an important thing. We could fault journalists for some of the things they do. We could talk about sensationalism and how that's exploited at a time like now. But I'd want to add this from my perspective on a positive note, that there are so many journalists out there in Pakistan and elsewhere that are doing a great job, and particularly while risking their lives. So thank you.
Mr. Solangi, would you like to say final remarks?
I think the post-COVID-19 world would be radically different from what was before. We are on the verge of radical social, economic, and political changes at the global level, and it would affect all countries, including the country that I live in. And during these historic times, the need for correct news and information would even be higher. So the journalism is not going to die. It would get a new lease of life. We just have to realize and be ready to capture that moment and redefine journalism for the post-COVID-19 arena.
Thank you, Mr. Solangi. Raza, would you like to wrap up?
So I think, well, I mean, we are all in this together, and whether journalists or the governments or citizens or health workers, I mean, this affects us all and in a very profound way, and it's likely to change our lives and the way we live and the way we function. So, recognizing the enormity of this challenge, and when it comes to media, I think it is of vital importance that we continue to do our work, we continue to inform the public, we continue to correct, disinformation, and check those in power who need to deliver on their mandates of both public welfare, public safety, and fighting this pandemic. The most important and critical part here is that this is also the first pandemic in human history which is happening in the digital age. We are getting updates by the minute, by the hour, and never has information on an epidemic transmitted in such a fast manner. And that is perhaps a good thing, because that is enabling us to actually identify what can be fixed and what can be done. And I think this is why the role of journalism is so vital and so important. It has been recognized. So, I'll just conclude by citing Amartya Sen. So in his great study on the famines in India and China and elsewhere, and one of the most important factors that he mentioned, that famines were made worse by lack of information, by lack of democracy. And wherever there was information on food, on work, on entitlements, people were less affected by the intensity of the famine. And that is also a lesson for this pandemic. Wherever there's better information, verified information, and accountability of those in power, we are better equipped to fight this challenge. Had we been not in a media controlled environment. Thank you.
Yep. And then I would like to, wrap up this with this, that I think the journalists, the media is the second layer of frontline warriors in the war against COVID-19 or any pandemic, because healthcare workers are the first line of, safety, the first line of warriors. And then because they are keeping us safe, they're saving the lives. And then media is the second layer of warriors who are going out there to keep the information flowing, to keep the public informed, and keep the governments and the other big companies and people who are entitled, keep them accountable. So this is very important. And with this, thank you all from me. Michael Kugelman, you joined us from Annapolis, Maryland. Mr. Murtaza Solangi from Islamabad, and Raza Rumi from New York. Over to you, Khurram Shehzad.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us for this awareness drive from Pakistani American Press Association. We really appreciate Mike, Murtaza, Raza, and especially Saqib for putting all together. The wonderful question that, so basically the idea behind today's webinar was to have this awareness to engage all the stakeholders across the globe, that we are also fighting on the front line with like other medical staff and other government officials. They are fighting on the front line. The same journalists have this many challenges in this COVID-19 crisis time. So inshallah, we'll keep you engaged when more these kind of webinar coming up in future. And again, thank you so much.